what's up you guys, this is Rob from AGayGuyPlays, and today we're suiting up like a boss when we get dressed to kill with the Eximus Palette. Now, this palette is definitely a grab bag as it pulls in colors from each faction's Eximus troops, which, at least in my eyes, don't really have a rhyme or reason behind their color schemes other than the fact that they need to look different from the standard troops. Now, while this palette does have a good amount of gradients that can be found elsewhere, I must say that if you look at it as a self-contained entity, it offers a lot of usable colors all in one place. Just note, we've got a lot of colors to run through on this one, so we're gonna burn through it pretty quickly. For the sake of avoiding repetition, keep in mind that unless noted, these gradients shift from light to dark as they progress. Now, as with all standard palettes, you can pick this one up under the equipment tab in the market for 75 plat. Now, the first row starts off with a grayish indigo. As you all know, I'm a big fan of these kinds of tones, as you can use a lighter end for accent colors and the darker as an almost black base. Just keep in mind you can dupe these with tones in the Daybreak palette. The next gradient is an odd desaturated yellow. It starts off a little lighter and cooler, but gets a little warmer as you make your way through it. Now, I'm not a big fan of the way it starts out, but on the far left end it turns into a very pretty muted goldenrod, which will make an awesome accent tone. And while you can find similar colors in a lot of places, the only true dupes will be in the Easter palette. The following row begins with a bright blue with a hint of green. It's still a little too saturated for my taste, but much like the previous row, this whole thing makes for great energy colors. Just note there are some very close dupes in both the Grineer, Ice, and Orokin palettes. The next gradient is a slightly desaturated red. It's well balanced and not super intense, making it great for accents. Energy-wise, it's not my favorite, but do note that the far right makes for a very interesting borderline red-pink energy color. To be frank, there are several palettes that have dupes for this, most notably the Valentine palette. The next row starts off with a muted teal that leans more on the blue side. Now, this is very similar in style to the first row and makes for awesome accent tones as well as deep bases. On its lighter end, it makes for some nice energy colors but loses its luster as it deepens up. And while there are similar tones out there, this is definitely unique enough for me to call it a palette exclusive. Next up is a very intense green gradient. For me, it's a bit much, but as with many saturated gradients, it makes for very solid energy colors. However, you can find some dead-on dupes in the Infested palette. Now, I'm a bit up in the air with the next gradient. It's a muted tan that runs on the cooler end. I don't know if I like this as an accent color, however, don't be fooled with its slight blandness. It's fantastic as an energy color. Now, the Orokin palette does have a similar gradient, but this one is definitely much cooler. Okay, so remember that green we just covered? Yeah, this is the same thing but more muted. All the same things apply except there is no dead-on dupe for this one. If you want a similar tone, however, you can take a look at the Halloween palette. Now, this next gradient made me do a literal double take as this slightly cool base yellow transitions into a really nice goldenrod, which is the exact same gradient you can find in the Storm palette, it's just had its order reversed. Now, this version is a little bit more muted than that one, but not by too much, and just like that gradient, this makes for great energy and accent colors. The next row is an off-white that transitions into a very pale sky blue. This makes for an awesome base tone and a very shimmery energy color. As plain as it may seem, this is one of my favorites from this palette and can't be found anywhere else. I love having this here as it gives the rest of the accent and energy colors in the palette something to work off of. The following gradient is a blue. I don't know how else to describe it because it's more saturated than a sky blue, but it's not quite a standard blue, but you're looking at it now and you know what it looks like. Honestly, it's not my favorite, but it's a palette exclusive and the energy color is kind of pretty. This next gradient is a nicely balanced red. At its deepest, it's a gorgeous garnet gem tone and makes for an awesome accent color. Per usual, this also makes a great energy color, but dupes of this can be found in several places, most notably on the classic saturated and Halloween palettes. The next one up is a gorgeous deep violet that is incredibly usable. It's perfect as an accent tone and works amazingly for energy. There's not much variation in the gradient itself, however the lighter end is just muted enough to make a difference. Honestly, this tone makes the palette for me. This is one of my go-tos for sure. The following gradient is this awesome muted army green. Now, this one has a ton of variation. The lighter end is great for energy, but in my opinion, kind of lacks as an accent tone, while the darker end looks great on a frame, but is kind of crap as an energy color. The next gradient is one of the few that swap tones. It starts off as a green that leans a little on the yellow side, and shifts to a more muted green-based teal as it transitions. The greener end is a bit too saturated for my taste, but the teal does finish off quite nicely. Now, this next set of tones is another one of my favorite. It's much like the previous off-white / pale blue, but instead it gradients into a soft golden tan. It works great as a base, a great accent, and a great energy color. Yes, I know it looks kind of plain, but definitely try this one out on your frames. Next up is an extremely muted, almost brown orange. Now, oranges aren't necessarily my favorite tone on a frame, but even if it's darker, and this one isn't too saturated that it becomes unusable. Now the last and final gradient is another orange. As I said with the previous, I'm not the biggest fan of saturated oranges, and that's exactly what this is. However, it does make for a fantastic fiery energy color. Now with all that aside, let's get dressed. So all in all, while I find that this palette has a lot of dupable colors, if we look at it as a standalone, it offers almost everything a player could need. It's got a few dark bases, a few light bases, some really nice accent tones, and some very solid energy colors. I find this one to be perfect for someone who doesn't necessarily have too many palettes and needs a well-organized jack of all trades to get them started. And as for you palette junkies, yes, there are a lot of dupes, but the palette exclusives in this one are freaking fantastic. The muted army green and muted teals, the two off-white tones, and that purple. If that don't make you just a little moist in the naughty bits, I don't know what will. So thank you all for watching another episode of Dress to Kill. Be sure to check out my previous episodes, and for those of you who want voting rights to what frames and palettes I review next, as well as a few other surprise extras, be sure to check out my Patreon for a little backdoor access. Now don't forget to do all the things that I ask you to do at the end of every one of these, and as always, stay drop dead gorgeous.